All right, it is Thursday, December 7th, 2023. And folks, you're watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. Hey there, I'm your host, Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem, work for Tapology as well, managing records over in China, Vietnam, Mongolia, the American Pacific Northwest, all over the place. But today, I have, we've got this podcast going on where I talk all things Asian MMA, both things coming up, things that just happened, and then take your questions after that. So if you have any questions, please drop those into the chat and I will get to those in just a second. Going to highlight some Asian prospects here coming up that are fighting this weekend. Before we do that, if you have not subscribed to the channel yet already, please do so. Less than 50 subs away from hitting that magical 1K number, which, as you may not know, is the magic number for monetization on YouTube. So a big milestone for me and would really appreciate your sub. But let's get into MMA, shall we? As usual, we usually start off the show with one Friday fights. Sorry, we're focusing a little bit there. Let's get into one Friday fights once the camera figures out where on earth we even are. Okay. Sorry about that. That is really weird. All right. I think we should be good. Let's take a look at one Friday fights. So we've got 3 MMA fights. They've added MMA fights to those one Friday fights events. Now they used to only have 1 or 2. Now they've got 3 per event. So looking at tomorrow's show, there's 2 Filipino prospects on there. You've got Fritz Aldin Biagtan, who is a 6-1 record, fighting at 135 pounds. Then you've got Carlo Bumina Ong, who is fighting at 145. He has a 3-0 record. Both of these fighters have fought twice in one Friday fights this year, and both those guys have won both of their fights in one Friday fights. So both fighting for the 3rd time for one championship. I'm thinking a lot about one championship this week, especially even today, just as I was driving around doing errands. I'm working on 1, maybe 2 videos that are going to be about some of the like deepest dive kind of stuff that I've done. And a lot of it is examining like the one Friday fights model, really like all of one championships model. And I'm looking, kind of one thing I'm looking at is a lot of the MMA fighters that have fought this year on these Friday fight shows, this lowest tier of one championship. I think it was at the press conference for 165 in Tokyo a week or 2 back that Chaudhry kind of laid it out of like, we've got our 3 very clear tiers. We've got the Friday fight shows are our lowest entry level tier, and then the Amazon Prime shows, and then we're bringing back the numbered shows, which are supposed to be the biggest shows. Really interesting that they didn't feel like they had any of those really, really big shows at all this in 2023. So bringing those back. I mean, and you think about those really big shows, those are a lot of the shows that you'd see a lot of MMA title fights. And they didn't really have any of those, which is why we didn't have as many MMA title fights this year, or MMA fights in general. So I'll get into all that in the video. But one of the questions I want to ask in one of these 2 videos is, did the Friday fight shows meaningfully raise up any MMA talent from the ground up, as it's kind of purported to be? Are there any MMA talents that have come up through Friday fights that can be transition to the bigger shows effectively? So these 2 guys from Philippines, both 2-0 and 1 championship this year through Friday fights. 1 championship, I've said it before, they have a really good hold on Filipino talent. So yeah, I'll be watching those 2 guys. Sorry, my camera is wigging out again. Other than that, so you got Friday fights. That's really the only MMA show that I know that's going on tomorrow on Friday. Let's talk about Saturday and then eventually Sunday. There's a lot of goods going on. So Saturday, got one Pride Fight Night 75. That's their monthly live show, is going down this Saturday from Jakarta. So not a whole lot to talk about on this. They've got their atomweight champion, Ade Pramana, who I would say is probably one of their best fighters overall. He's going to be defending the belt against Lipin Satoris, who is on a 3-fight win streak at atomweight, one championship. They fought before. Pramana submitted him with a guillotine choke in the second round. Not for a title, so this time scheduled for 5 rounds at atomweight. Rematch, should be interesting to see what Ade Pramana, as he just keeps rolling through atomweight, which isn't necessarily a super stacked division, but always interesting to see what fighters at a weight class like men's atomweight, kind of what their career path is going to be like. So that's going down Saturday. Get to UFC in just a second. Ooh, Vietnam. Vietnam has a huge, maybe the biggest weekend in Vietnamese MMA ever. I'll say it. Maybe the biggest weekend ever in Vietnamese MMA. Why? Because of 2 shows. Hold on. The camera's driving me nuts. Probably driving you crazy a little bit too. See if I scoot back a little bit, if it'll kind of feel things kind of on the same level here. Okay. Let's see if that's any better. So you got 2 shows this weekend in Vietnam. You've got AFC 29, which is Korean promotion holding shows a couple times a year in Vietnam. And then you've also got Lion Championship 11. AFC doesn't really have very many Vietnamese fighters, as far as I know, if any. AFC going to Vietnam without any Vietnamese fighters, it looks like. That's interesting. However, some of the best Korean prospects you'll find more and more, and I mentioned this in I think in my UFC Vegas preview video that I posted this week. Check that out afterwards if you haven't seen it already. But I think Korean MMA is about to see a huge boom on the elite level. It's already seen a big boom on the regional level. A lot of great gyms in Korea now. A lot of Black Combat's thriving, and so many fighters, like Korean fighters, that I think in 2 to 3 years are just going to be flooding into the UFC. A friend asked me about that earlier this week. He's like, "Yeah, who are you talking about?" And I sent him like 10 names of like, yeah, I could see all these fighters in the UFC. Several of these fighters are fighting this Saturday in AFC. In the main event, you've got the welterweight title, which is Kim Song-wook, who fought in Road UFC. He's going to be fighting Filipino Arvin Chan. Co-main event for the lightweight title, we've got Park Jae-hyun, who also fought in like a one-off fight at Road UFC. He's going to be fighting Abdallah Biada. I'd have to see what country he's from. You've also got Road to UFC alum Park Jun-young fighting. Got Song Young-jae, who's a little bit older, but he's fighting Shunichi Shimizu, a really experienced Japanese guy. I thought that was for the featherweight title. So I think that's 3 title fights on this card. Also got a pretty good middleweight prospect in Ko Suk-hyun. He is fighting against Alwin Kinsai. And then you've also got Jong Sung-hyo versus Abdulaziz Abdullayev, and Che In-ho versus Ali Akbarpour. So that's your full card for AFC 29 in Vung Tau, Vietnam. Like I said, those 2 guys in those 2 title fights, and then Ko Suk-hyun, the 3 prospects I'm highlighting to you. You've also got over in Hanoi, Vietnam, you've got Lion Championship 11 going down, which so far hasn't really produced anyone that you would have heard of unless you're Vietnamese and follow them. But give it some time, and they're going to start cranking out some really good fighters. They have promoted both amateur and pro level fights, and they usually hold a show once a month, maybe once every 1 to 2 months. But really good production in these Vietnamese shows. I believe you can catch them on their Facebook page, like the live broadcasts. Gonna show you this fight card, and we can take a look at the goods. There's been a couple fights fall off recently, but still got a couple title fights. Sometimes the line between amateur and pro, I'm not always entirely sure. I've been the one putting in all the results in for Tapology. And as far as I know, there's fights with 3-3-minute rounds and elbow pads. And then there's everything else, which is the 5-minute rounds. And so I've always divided things up that way. But it's still a little bit odd to me that they've got this guy with this 0-0 record, Vanny Niem, fighting Felipe Nego Chadle in an event for the featherweight belt. Maybe something I don't know about with Niem's record. But then co-main, you've got the lightweight championship, Wen Van Camille versus Ban Van Huang. 3-0 lightweight fighter over on that side. Robson, both of these Brazilian guys, by the way, they train in Brazil. Robson de Oliveira. They're the one girl that I've been watching come up through championship that I think will probably get a shot in a bigger promotion. Truk Win. She is not on this card, but she is, I believe, their flyweight champion on the women's side. So she's not on here, but she is one to watch. Otherwise, I mean, you probably haven't heard of any of these names, so I'll take that off the screen. But definitely keep an eye on these guys. I definitely am, and not because it's my job to do so, but Lion Championship, they're the ones doing the work in Vietnam right now. So very cool. Other than that, you've got Sunday, you've got both Deep Impact 117 and Gladiator 24. On the Deep show, you've got an interim strawweight belt between Haruo Ochi versus Yosuke Uehara. You also got Park Soo-woo on that card against Amp the Rocket. Not Amp the Rocket. Different fighter, Luknam Bunson, who is from Thailand. As far as I know, that fight is still taking place. I didn't see that on the Tapology page, but Park Soo-woo, very good Korean female fighter. We've also got Seo Dong-hyun on the card against Ruto Isako. Seo Dong-hyun, I think, what weight does he compete at? Featherweight, I think. But he's a prospect I've had an eye on. So 2 Korean fighters on this Deep show that I think are worth looking at. On Gladiator, they always host pretty big events. Some good fighters on. You got Shuya Kamikubo, of all fighters, popping up again on Gladiator. You've also got Choi Dong-hoon, would be the Korean guy. Oh, and Lee Sung-chol also on Gladiator. Lee Sung-chol, I would say, is a pretty good Korean prospect, needs a few more fights. But of all the fighters on Gladiator, the guy I'm watching is Shuya Kamikubo. His fight at Road to UFC, when he lost against Xiao Long, was very strange. It didn't seem like he was all that invested in the fight. Of course, some of that is just his demeanor, I think. But his name's being announced, and he's like sitting on the octagon floor. But not a very good performance from Shuya Kamikubo. He's got a lot of talent. He's fought in one championship. He won his first Road to UFC fight and was a favorite to win that whole tournament, but just had a very flat performance against Xiao Long. So how is he going to respond? Is he going to look a little bit more motivated, a little bit more fierce in this return fight? We'll have to see. Gladiator usually airs on YouTube. So those are the Asian MMA shows, which brings us to UFC Vegas, which I'm calling UFC Shanghai in Vegas 83. I already made a whole video on this event where I'm just kind of talking off the cuff about everything. So feel free to ask any more follow-up questions. But yeah, I love the Korean fighters on this card. I love the Chinese fighters. Song Yedong, Park Sung-hyun, Park Jun-young are the guys I'm really excited about, obviously. Other than that, a lot of different things to like on the card. I mean, some fun fights that aren't Asian fights. You've got the co-main between Anthony Smith and Khalil Roundtree should be amazing. Naz Pakparas versus Jamie Malarkey should be pretty good. I've got Sumu Darby fighting Tim Elliott. That's a crazy fight. I mean, he was supposed to fight Alan Nascimento, and now he's fighting a guy that could actually like really bump him up in the rankings. And ordinarily, I would say a fight with Tim Elliott would be not a great matchup for Sumudarji. Tim Elliott is a guy that hustles like no one else. I would think he'd probably like take down Sumudarji and grapple him quite a bit. But fighting Tim Elliott on short notice, and this fight is at bantamweight. I don't know, what kind of shape is Tim Elliott going to be in? He's usually in incredible shape and can push a really fast pace over the full 3 rounds. So I'm thinking he seems like the kind of guy that's probably in shape in and out of season. So I think this still could be a tough fight for Sumudarji. But if you're going to fight Tim Elliott, now's the time to do it. He's a little bit older and he is fighting on just a few days' notice. So, but yeah, Tim Elliott is notoriously a hard guy to put away. And this could be a difficult matchup for Sumudarji just based on his strengths and weaknesses, but should be really exciting. Both guys, some of the most exciting flyweights around. And Tim Elliott comes from my hometown of Wichita, Kansas. So hard fight for me to watch just because I usually root for both guys, but should be very exciting fight. Anything else? If you're wanting my thoughts on the rest of the card, check out my video that I posted recently or throw questions in the chat. Be happy to answer those. Let's get into a little bit of just like news from throughout the week. So just within the last hour, some breaking news from our friend Nolan King at MMA Junkie. Arichi Long is scheduled to fight Daniel Marcos at UFC Vegas 86 on February 10th. So Arichi Long coming off a win over Johnny Munoz, and Daniel Marcos was supposed to fight this weekend against Carlos Vera, but because some visa issues had to cancel that fight, he has been quickly rebooked to fight Arichi Long February 10th. So I think that is a little bit of a tough matchup for Arichi Long. It seems like a pretty big step up. So yeah, interesting fight. I wouldn't have necessarily gone that way matchmaking, but interesting fight nevertheless. Also had other Asian MMA news. We had AFC 55 this week on yesterday on Wednesday. And for the most part, the Kazakh guys had, there's a lot of Kazakh versus foreigner fights. And for the most part, the Kazakhs rolled over. The exception was Jason Pone, PFL guy, won a split decision in his fight. But otherwise, like Jalgus Jumagulov fought Masato Nakamura. Fairly easy fight for him at bantamweight. The main event, who is that? Kabdrak. I'm blanking on this guy's name, but Diaz Aaron Gaipov defending the belt or winning the belt against Ryuya Fukuda by unanimous decision, winning the flyweight championship, and then Nurbek Kabdrakhmanov beating Muhammad Emanov of Russia by TKO in the third round, winning the defending the featherweight belt. Emanov had an 18-1 record. Nurbek had a 8-2 record. So that could be considered a pretty big upset. Nurbek, I'm just going to call him Nurbek because I'm struggling with that last name. Nurbek definitely needs to move up in some Kazakh rankings. So that's a big win for him. So yeah, great fight. Pretty solid event, full of finishes. Check it out on their YouTube channel after this and check out all the crazy finishes. There was a lot of good ones. But yeah, otherwise, let's get to your questions, shall we? All righty. What you got for me today? Do I think one will go under like that bloody article stated? Feel that they are the only competition to the UFC despite being a 4-ounce Muay Thai organization pretending to be an MMA organization. Yeah, and I kind of touched on this last week a little bit. Short answer, I think that one of two outcomes will happen. So Deal Street Asia said that their financial runway would end Q2, Q3 of 2024. I think that one championship will last longer than that. I think that they'll get a lifeline from someone somewhere. I don't think we're just going to see them go away in, August or September. So either they're going to last a little bit longer, but if they do, they're going to have to make some intense changes to their product. I think what you're going to see from one championship is them make some pretty strong changes, like I said, to their practices. Sorry, my camera is still having a bad day. It's hard to get this thing to focus when I'm having to. Okay. I don't know. Maybe we can just put this thing on manual. Sorry, folks, this is embarrassing. This doesn't usually happen, but it does happen sometimes. All right, that's decent. We're going to stick with that. So one championship, are they going to fold? Either they will get a lifeline from somewhere and then fold maybe end of next year or sometime after that. But I do think that one championship is going to have to drastically change their product. And what that'll probably mean is a massive downscale. So I was thinking about it today because I was doing a bunch of like entry, putting in some data onto a little Excel spreadsheet earlier today for an upcoming video that I'm working on with one championship. And they've had all these different eras, and they more than any other MMA promotion has like drastically changed what they are. Like, what is one championship? Well, they're an Asian, East Asian, Southeast Asian MMA promotion. Now they're a global MMA promotion that dabbles in other, that will promote some other, Muay Thai or kickboxing. Well, now they're this four martial arts. Well, now they're more of a Muay Thai promotion that's based in Thailand. Like, they are jerking things, and that tells you that like they are struggling and they are trying to make ends meet and trying to change the bottom line so that they can make it, basically. What's the next change? I don't know. It sounds like there will probably promote more MMA fights next year, try to put on more big MMA fights with their existing roster, which is a little bit tricky for me. But like, I do think that they're in a rebuilding phase. They had to scale back MMA because if you think about it, MMA is probably, of the four martial arts, the most expensive one to run because they're having to bring the most fighters in from out of the country. They've got MMA fighters on the roster with long-term tenures with their company, so they're expensive contracts. So honestly, like, again, like if I was one championship, cut MMA, cut grappling, focus on Muay Thai and maybe kickboxing. But otherwise, like, the door is wide open for one championship to just be a Muay Thai promotion and totally eat up that whole space, and become like this. And then, like, as you like become profitable just by being a Muay Thai promotion, once you become profitable, then add kickboxing, then add Muay Thai or MMA. That's what I would do. I think we could see one championship do something like that, where it's like, hey, we're just going to be a Muay Thai promotion for the foreseeable future. We're just going to hang out in Bangkok the whole time, and we're going to be putting on these really exciting events that fans love. I think you would see them. I think you would see that happen before you see them just totally fold. So that's what I think but the temptation for one championship is that they want to get really big and do everything and scale up way bigger than their resources allow them to, which puts them in these continual issues of like, yeah, we're gonna have more events. We're going to have all 4 of these martial arts. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that, and then they are trying to build really big, but they're still like in debt and hemorrhaging money. So I feel like they should scale down to a level where they can really quickly turn a profit off of the thing that works best for them, which is their Muay Thai product, and then go from there. What do I think of the youngest Lee sibling being signed to one championship? Angela just retired after the very sad tragedy that struck their family. I feel like this is a lack of mind presence. I saw, Adrian Lee. I saw that he was signed to one championship. He's got a pretty good amateur record right now, something like 5-0 or 6-0 or something. Signing a fighter to one championship who is 0-0 as a pro, I am careful to say, I think there are some folks that kind of make the connection between one championship pushing the Lee siblings too quickly and what happened with Angela Lee. And I am careful not to make that connection. I don't want to say that because it's far more complex than that. However, I think what I would have preferred with Adrian Lee is if one championship wants to lock him in, give him a developmental deal to have him fight in regional like Hawaiian promotions or California promotions as a pro, and let him get a little bit more established, and then bring him over to one championship. Put him on a developmental deal where you're locking him into your promotion. You're maybe giving him some money to train, but like, I feel like, and I know One Friday Fights has signed pro fighters at 0-0, but like, don't give this kid the keys to the kingdom. Like, he needs to learn how to be an MMA fighter that flies under the radar before he's an MMA fighter that has a lot of pressure on his shoulders. That is essential. Like, even athletes who transition to MMA that are like a Bo Nickel, he's already felt the pressure of like another sport in wrestling. So with that, it's a little bit different. But and the kid's literally, he's a kid, he's a teenager. He needs to be able to compete in MMA with more anonymity. He's done that on the amateur level, but he needs to do that on the pro level. I feel like that's essential. Could things be different and go great for him, and things are different totally, but that's what I would do. I think that's really important. Maybe you answered this before, but why don't they just make John versus Jan? Yeah, why don't they? Seems like MMA Twitter wants that fight. Do the Chinese fans not want that fight? Maybe that's why. So when Dana was asked about that, I think he said something very strange, like, "Oh, we wouldn't do that fight in China." Because someone asked him, like, "Why don't you do Zhang versus Yan in China?" And he said, "Oh, we wouldn't do it there." So maybe, just maybe, you will see that fight pop up as a pay-per-view co-main either in February, UFC 298, or UFC 299 Miami. Hopefully, I don't feel like things went great for Zhang Wei Li when that would be a weird fight to put in Miami, wouldn't it? Things didn't go great for her last time she fought in Jacksonville. So, or I could always put her on UFC 300 too. But it seems like if I were the UFC, totally, like February in Anaheim, California, huge Chinese, Southern California, LA, huge Chinese population. That seems like a no-brainer to me if all parties are willing and healthy. Put that there. I think that they do want that fight, though. I do think that. All right, Jessica Rose Clark of Singing with a Lark. What is your opinion on the common saying striker versus grappler or grappler versus grappler seems very reductive considering fighters have specific skills in each matchup, and it's not as simple as saying striker versus striker. For example, Masvidal and Wonderboy was well to striker versus striker, but they do different things. Why do we talk about the sport like that? Because in sports, we want categories. We want boxes to be able to put things, and we want to find common narratives to make sense of things and give us a grid. So that's why we use that phrase, even though I think when you actually watch the fight, it usually plays out different. You do grappler versus grappler. It ends up sometimes being a striking fight. It also ends up being a grappling match, or you do striker versus grappler and it ends up being a clinch fight. You know exactly what I'm saying here, but I think it's because we like to have categories. Think back to like the original UFC premise. What happens when a striker fights a grappler? Karate versus jiu-jitsu. That's the intrigue of it. And that was when that category was kind of created, honestly, back in the original UFC days. So that is kind of a remnant from those original UFC days of generating intrigue, creating categories to try and make sense of how a fight could go. I think that's why. Hi, Chris. Happy holidays, man. Happy holidays to you, Jimmy. How come when Dana asked about why UFC China fell through, he says, no one knows? Probably because he doesn't understand. Because I would say probably because he thought that it was supposed to happen and go through. I mean, they announced the event, right? The UFC doesn't typically announce an event unless they're like 99 to 100% sure. So it probably something that fell through where he was like, I don't fully understand the, like, when it comes down to the bottom line, why we weren't approved for this, or like, yeah, I mean, he knows the reason. It was because of event permits. I'm actually going to ask around a little bit on this of like what the technicality was on the event permit not going through, if it was a Shanghai thing or if it was a Shanghai indoor stadium thing. But my guess is that even at the bottom line, it was somewhat confusing for all parties involved. But he probably just didn't want to get into like the technical aspects of event permits, things like that is my guess. Sherman W., welcome. I'm from Melbourne, Australia, by way of Beijing, China. Do you think the UFC would ever schedule some Chinese fighters at Australia? Well, yeah, they were supposed to have Zhang Mingyang fight at UFC, was it 293 last February was that a Melbourne show or Perth show? Either way, Zhang Mingyang was supposed to fight last February, making his UFC debut, actually a fight that I reported. But Zhang was injured. So yeah, definitely. I think that's a great place to put Chinese fighters, especially per my last question, if they're having trouble staging an event in China. Very similar time zone. A lot of Chinese fighters are training in Thailand. Pretty short flight for them over to Australia, relatively short. So totally. When you think about like when the UFC is building a card, like think about the Saudi Arabia card coming up in March. How are they building this card? They don't have a single fighter from Saudi Arabia on their roster. Well, you think about it in terms of time zone. Of course, there's like cultural similarities, a lot of the like Muslim fighters, but also like time zone. You're probably going to see some European fighters on that card. I think about Muhammad Mokaev. He was an absolute shoe-in for that card because he's British. He's a Muslim fighter who is also British. So he fits both like, I don't know if he has a big following in England, but in the UK, but like he fits that billing, and then he's also Muslim, fits that billing. So it's like this perfect shoe-in. But yeah, you'll probably see some other like European fighters on that card just because the time zones are similar. So kind of similar thing with like Southeast Asia and Australia, New Zealand, is that it's a little bit easier to air in those markets if you can't get a show in China, for sure. Is Sumidarji normally a flyweight? He is. He seems absolutely huge for flyweight. Would he ever move up to 135? This fight is at 135 just because it's at short notice. He's a pretty lean guy. I think that's why he's able to make that cut. But if he were to ever to bulk up, I would think he would. And my guess is that he cuts a good amount of weight to get down to 125 because, yeah, he is pretty tall and really lanky. Let's just see what the numbers say. I mean, think about like Davison Figueiredo used to cut down to flyweight. There's some pretty big dudes, like thinking like Zach Makovsky and Joseph Benavidez. So he's 5'8", which is pretty tall for a flyweight, and 72-inch reach. Let's just look at Tim Elliott. Let's compare the stats there. Tim Elliott, 5'7", an inch shorter, 66-inch reach. So Sumidarji has a 6-inch reach advantage over Tim Elliott. That could be significant for sure. Yeah. I think he's just a scrappy, lean dude. Some guys just built that way. So, all right, big question. Figgy had a great performance, speaking of Davison Figueiredo. Great performance against Font this weekend, and he trained at Fight Ready with Cejudo. Indeed. Figgy is one of the most undisciplined, chaotic, but entertaining fighters, but was able to adapt to Fight Ready's game plan well. Doesn't that reinforce my theory? Okay, you're going full circle here. Mackenzie Dern, who also trained at Fight Ready, is uncoachable. I don't think that it's probably fair to compare Figueiredo and Dern. Two very different fighters coming from different backgrounds, different a lot of things. Figueiredo, I don't know if I can comment on him being undisciplined. I think some people would make that assertion because of his weight misses, which for me, that's not so much being undisciplined. That is more just being overly ambitious on how much weight you can cut and being a bantamweight, trying to fit yourself into a flyweight body. So yeah, I feel like Figueiredo should have been at bantamweight this whole time, even though he was able to capture the flyweight belt. I mean, if Figueiredo would have been at bantamweight for the last 7-8 years, what could he have done at that weight class? Good chance he would have at least fought for a title, if not been champion there too. Even though bantamweight is absolutely stacked to the rafters, but You have an interesting theory, and yeah, you asked that question before about Mackenzie Dern being uncoachable. Give Mackenzie Dern some credit for the progress that she has made over the 10, 15 UFC fights that she's had. She's made pretty good progress. Becoming an elite MMA fighter, starting as merely an elite grappler, and then becoming not only a successful pro MMA fighter, much less an elite level MMA fighter ranked in the top 10 in the UFC. There's definitely credit to be due there. I just wonder if Mackenzie Dern either hit her ceiling or just had a bad fight. Maybe some things wrong. There's also like compatibility between a fighter and a coach. And I wonder if maybe Mackenzie Dern and the coaches at Fight Ready haven't quite found their fit yet. Yeah. So only she and her coaches really know the answer to that question. But Fight Ready may not be a good fit for her. It may not. She may. I wonder about like a alpha male. That could be another great place for Mackenzie Dern. It's in California, where she has typically trained a lot, very wrestling heavy gym, a lot of smaller fighters. So a lot of people her size that she could spar with. Maybe Alpha Male would be a good alternative for her as well. Let's see. I know you don't like watching interviews. It's not that I don't like, I just don't do it often. Why do you think fighters at 115 who aren't even fighting Weili yet are already disrespecting her skills? Because they're trying to get a fight. We're in the prize fighting business. Saying like Dernan Suarez saying she has a bad ground game and said Limoges would beat her. It's because we're in the prize fighting business. You pick a fight with someone, you make someone mad, you make them want to fight you. It makes that fight all the more likely to come together. You get a title fight, you get paid more money. If you beat the champ, you get a lot more money because you're fighting in more title fights, which gets you a lot more money. It's all, I see it as all a strategy of getting yourself the most money, to be honest. That's how I feel. As a journalist, have you ever written any articles that were really inflammatory towards a fighter? No, I haven't, unintentionally or intentionally. There's been times where I have, no, I have not. There's been a couple times where I've gotten details wrong about like a fighter's record merely by my own laziness or oversight, where I've gotten something like a fighter's record wrong and then they'll correct me on it. But I don't think I've made any enemies with fighters just yet. I got a lot of negative pushback from my PFL video that I posted a couple of weeks ago when they had the big announcement. And that was literally like a day or same day as the announcement. And so I threw out all these thoughts. And then I got a lot of, it was like the first time I got a lot of like really negative YouTube comments, which I don't really care about that. Comments, good or bad, help you in the algorithm. So, you know, I didn't really care about that. I threw out some somewhat polarizing opinions, but there were also opinions that were pretty like fresh and raw and just like gut level. And when you do that, there's going to be some things that aren't all the way thought through. But at the same time, I stand by like 95% of those opinions. That was really the only thing that I put out there where there was like a big pushback. I mean, and granted, a video with a couple hundred views, not this sort of like international pushback. But that was like the only thing. It's bound to happen at some point. Every well-known MMA media member has enemies and that are fighters, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Eventually, like I'm going to put out a breakdown video at some point where I say a fighter has a low chance of winning, or I point out their weaknesses, and it's going to make a fighter mad. It's going to happen, but to my knowledge, hasn't happened yet. Maybe not the best question of asking whether one will fold, but do you hope one will fold? Because Chaudhry is a trash-talking scumbag. Oh, you're funny. You're funny, James. I don't know if I have like a clear, and I think I've touched on this before of like, I have many frustrations with one championship. And I think if one championship said, okay, we are going to have an MMA league where we are specifically focused on doing this thing, such as we're specifically focused on cultivating talent and like building MMA in Southeast Asia. And then we're going to have our separate Muay Thai promotion. And then we're going to have our separate grappling league. I think a lot of my frustrations with one championship would be released. People will say like, well, it's one less. The argument for one championship is that, well, there will be one less promotion for MMA fighters to choose between. That's what people are saying with the PFL Bellator thing. But the thing is that I don't see fighters like considering one championship as an option. I mean, when was the last time a notable MMA fighter, I mean, if we're talking on like the lowest level, should I go to one championship or should I go to Matrix Fight Night? Should I go to one championship or should I go to Brave? if that's the question, then sure. But it's like at this point, fighters that are at the higher levels, like people are pointing out like they're not choosing between UFC and ONE because most likely a lot of the best fighters are kind of locked into their UFC contracts. It's why you're not seeing a lot of fighters. Like, why aren't there fighters going over to ONE championship from the UFC? Like, when was the last time that actually happened? And not in a situation where the UFC was kind of like, yeah, sure, go ahead. We don't care. We're going to release you anyways. You kind of ran your course with us. I don't know. Like, you don't see that happening. So the argument of like, well, we need ONE championship because it's one more option with the current structure of things, I don't know if they really have the ability to have ONE championship as an option. If they do have ONE championship as an option, then ONE championship is not offering good enough deals, or their contracts are too restrictive and fighters are finally seeing that. And so they're just passing over ONE. That's what I think. It's one of those two things. So I don't know that we necessarily need, like, do we need ONE championship as an MMA promotion? As a kickboxing promotion, Muay Thai promotion, I think ONE championship is, especially as a Muay Thai promotion, I don't want ONE championship to fold. But what are they doing in MMA? What are they doing in grappling? Kickboxing, there are a couple options out there now, a couple other places where fighters can compete, but I just like it feels like they're holding on to MMA just because they want to hold on to it, and that's where their stars are at. But like, I don't know. I wish that they would separate things better. Like, if ONE championship was like, we're going to be the best grappling league in the world, we're going to spin off and have our own grappling series that is separate from everything else. We're going to tailor everything to be tailor-made for grappling. We're not going to have it in a cage or even in a ring. We're going to have it on an open surface without walls, and we're still going to kind of put our spin onto things. We're going to make the rules so that it's really exciting, and these events are just going to be all about grappling. Sure, like, there's been companies that have done that before, but ONE championship, they're going to do their own spin on it. I would love that. That would be so cool. We're going to have it the day before our other kickboxing event. We're going to have it the day before our MMA event. I think I've just like grown really frustrated with ONE championship. But they could definitely change. They could change a lot over the next year, as they've already like changed things different ways to be like, maybe if we try this will to kind of turn our fortunes around. If we try this will turn our fortunes around. I know I'm speaking a lot from my own preferences. I do not prefer to have this like mashup event with 4 different martial arts, and we've got MMA just to have MMA. We've got grappling just to have grappling. I don't love that. That has been a turnoff for me. And I think also what you're referring to of like the hyperbolic branding of ONE championship is also really frustrating to me. And I feel like I never know what to like trust because of that. So, but yeah, I think it's really just the last couple of years that I've gotten frustrated. Before that, I really enjoyed ONE championship and like loved watching their MMA events, and take it like, maybe I'm a minority of like being a combat sports fan that is really only going to interrupt my schedule for MMA. Like, I really only tune in to MMA, and that's mostly just like because I don't have the time to, and I've talked about this, like, it's nothing against other combat sports. I just don't have the time to follow grappling, kickboxing, Muay Thai, and keep up with all the athletes and everything. So that's just my own preference, but I don't want them to fold. I just want them to change things up for sure. What are your thoughts on the flyweight division? A few years back, the UFC was going to shut it down. Say it did shut down, what would happen to the fighters in that division? Well, I think Bellator probably would have started a flyweight division. I think a lot of them actually would have gone to Asia to to like rise in or won championship, I think they would have just gone other places. But like, I mean, now what? There's like over 50 fighters in the UFC's flyweight division. It's quickly catching up to the other divisions. It used to be the smallest division, and now there are several smaller divisions. Like, I think it's probably about the same size as heavyweight, maybe the same size as light heavyweight, bigger than women's bantamweight, probably around the same size as the other two women's divisions. So yeah, flyweight's booming. It, for a while, it kind of had this stigma of being like unmarketable in terms of stars. But to me, I was always like, well, marketability of stars in a given division, that comes and goes. I mean, you could look at that with like, what, I don't know, like welterweight over the years sometimes has not always been the most like division with the most stars, or like even there was a time when bantamweight wasn't like a super attractive division. Like heavyweight has come and gone. Like, so yeah, for me, I was like, well, as soon as there's like a Conor McGregor for flyweight, everyone's going to take back what they said. The argument was that like, because flyweights are little guys, you know, no one wants to see two little guys. I mean, folks that are probably on like the lowest level of casual, and nothing wrong with being on that level, but I think that they thought that it wasn't necessarily marketable to that level of fan. That's why you see random like low level heavyweight fights on main cards here and there, is because they are like, hey, heavyweights, they knock people out. People want to see that. Flyweight literally might be my favorite division in the UFC. It's one of the divisions where it's like, just because a fight is in that division, I'll put down what I'm doing and watch the fight in its entirety. Yeah, just because I like it's like you're watching a fight, but on fast forward. The scrambles, always super fun. Flyweight fights rarely suck. They rarely suck. I mean, come on, they rarely do. But yeah, I think they were going to shut it down. The storm of like, you know, we had Demetrius Johnson on here they were like basing it on Demetrius Johnson of like, not a super marketable star, small division. Overall, we're making the assumption that people don't want to watch small guys fight. Doesn't have a mass appeal to it. But I always knew as soon as they found really popular fighters in that division, things would change. And with the division growing, the likelihood that you're going to get someone that's marketable is just going to get bigger and bigger. And like Davison Figueiredo has like over 1 million, I think over 1 million Instagram followers. Brandon Moreno has a couple million, like, and the division is still just 3 or 10 years old. So eventually, yeah, they'll get there. And like, again, and I think the same thing with like women's bantamweight. People say, and they're right, women's bantamweight, the worst division in the UFC right now. And they're right, it's not great, but like eventually it'll be a good division. Eventually they'll be able to refill it, and there's going to be someone else that comes along to women's bantamweight that's really popular. They're going to have fresh matchups eventually. And maybe this is 10 more years down the line. I don't know, but eventually that'll be a good division. And probably even like women's atomweight and women's featherweight, all those divisions, like they're going to be good divisions at some point. It's just a matter of when. That's what I think. So matter of mind, going back to the Lees, matter of mind presence means that they aren't considering what happened to Angela Lee and Victoria. Yeah, let's see how they promote them. Let's see how they promote Adrian Lee. Are they going to give him the keys to the kingdom, or are they just, what they could do, just put him on like 4 or 5 of these One Friday Fight shows in a row and let him just be another fighter on the card. Don't give him a whole lot of extra programming. Don't give him a lot of push. So it's up to them. Let's see how they promote him. So you're saying it's not just the pressure either. It's the promotion pushing him as someone fighting for his dead sister. Maybe don't push so much pressure on a young fighter. Yeah, I agree. In 2001, Zhang was ridiculed online in both Jacksonville and New York when she fought Rose. I think less so in New York, but you're right. seems like she's beloved now. If Zhang versus Yan in America, would they subject Yan to the same bigotry? I think if they're to do it in Southern California, or even, I mean, yeah, come up here to the Pacific Northwest, especially like Seattle. Put on a pay-per-view in Seattle. UFC was supposed to put on a show in Seattle last year. They have a huge Asian population. So yeah, do West Coast. Even in New York was not nearly as bad as Jacksonville. So yeah, just don't take her to the South. I would say just, yeah, no to Texas, no to Florida. Other than that, I think we should be good. Maybe don't go to Utah either. Follow up my question about styles. Wouldn't it be better to talk about specific techniques instead of saying, oh, Adesanya's elite striking? Like, what about it makes it elite? What is the downside of that type of talk in MMA media? Dan Toms talks specifics, and so does Mod Ghost. Same with the heavy hand. Yeah, I mean, not everyone can be an analyst, right? And even analysts, not everyone can be an expert in every fighter. The nerds, like the guys you mentioned, what do they do for their job? They just sit around and they watch fights. They analyze things and break things down. They get good enough to the point to where they can watch a fight and they can remember the really specific positive things. But like Luke Thomas can do this. Luke Thomas can watch a fight, and immediately after the fight is over, he can go live and he can talk about some of the like very specific things that a fighter was doing. He can remember it all. He can communicate it to you. That is really hard to do. And not everyone can be an analyst. I would not consider myself like, I think I have analyst tendencies, but I haven't been practicing as an analyst long enough to just be able to be like, yeah, let me give you the 7 points of Adesanya's striking that make him extremely unique and really good. I can't, like, I could maybe give you a few, but like, you can't just name a fighter and I can do that. So I think that's probably why people do that in MMA media. Now, if I'm like preparing, so I made this Shavkat versus Wonderboy video that I released earlier this week. It's doing really well on my channel. And even I didn't go all the layers deep that I could on that, but I went a couple layers, and that took a lot of time. That took some thinking, some hypothesizing, and I think like in time you'll see me like hit some of those other layers as I'm able to really like become familiar and just get smarter overall. But I think, yeah, don't underestimate how much work it takes to become that intelligent and breaking things down, for sure. Common Writer. What's up? Have you seen the picture of MMA Guru and DDP? That guy is a tank. If he lifted weights, he'd probably look like an actual beast. I have not. That's right. He did interview him. Let me see if I can pull that up. Oh my, that almost looks like it's photoshopped. I don't know if you can see that, but I did not expect Guru to look like that at all. That dude has the broadest shoulders. And part of it too is the angle, like DDP is standing a little bit more like this. Guru is standing a little bit more square to the camera. So I think it could be that. But DDP definitely is a lot shorter. That is hilarious. I did not expect him to look like that, fully standing up. That's hilarious. So comparing Whaley and Dern, both trained at Fight Ready, sure. One learned how to game plan and is disciplined with distance control. Dern fought with her chin up. Yeah. Whaley has a much deeper experience with striking as well. She was fighting in Sanda and Kung Fu before fighting in MMA. So I do give her that advantage. So does that reinforce my theory. It added my argument Weili started fighting at 24 years old. Same as Dern, so there aren't any excuses at the MMA. Yeah, I mean, Weili was fighting. She was fighting in some kind of striking art ever since she was a kid. So she does have a much longer time striking, but I do, yeah, there's probably something there of like, why, like, okay, we have to be honest. Why does Dern make these rudimentary errors, like what you're saying, this late into her career? Why have those not been corrected and drilled into her? And do the coaches take some responsibility for that? I'm not, man, I don't know. I mean, your criticism is definitely valid. That is for sure. That is totally for sure. I don't know. I mean, at some point, when is like some of the basics going to get through? I don't know. Yeah, I agree. It's unacceptable at this point in her UFC career to be making mistakes like that. So obligatory JMMA question. Do you think that Tenshin, the kickboxer, would be good at MMA? He double legs people in kickboxing a lot. Don't know enough about Tenshin's skills to know about that, but kickboxers have often done pretty well in MMA. Like boxing going into MMA, usually not that much. We haven't had a whole lot of examples, but usually hasn't fared very well. BJJ, hit or miss. Going back to the Dern question, kickboxers usually, or wrestling usually pretty good. Kickboxers typically, especially recent years, been pretty good. So I think if he took a year or two to work on grappling, 2 years, I think he could be pretty good for sure. Love to see that. I'm not sure how old he is, but that would be really fun for sure. Obviously, I don't want to see the fighters of one. Yeah, that's the other thing with one championship is like, I obviously don't wish any harm or like anything negative on the athletes in one championship. That's for sure. Now, if you're Anatoly Malikin and one folds tomorrow, I think you're going to find another job. I think you'll be just fine. I think most of those fighters that are really talented, the champions, they're going to be just fine. Probably not going to lose out on much of a payday. Most of them, I mean, like Christian Lee, probably getting paid pretty well. Anatoly Malikin, probably getting paid pretty well. Angela Lee, when she was fighting, probably got paid one of the higher paid fighters, Stamp Fairtex for sure. So can they find those same paydays elsewhere? Not sure. But yeah, the athletes. Sorry, back to your question. Wish them the best, but the exploitative contracts and matchmaking makes me want it. Yeah, I think that is more. So, but what's the bigger, Christian Lee, exploitative contract in one championship or an exploitative contract in the UFC? Take your pick. Because Christian, I mean, if one championship folded, Christian Lee, Anatoly Malikin, Stamp Fairtex, all those fighters, absolutely UFC level. I would put all those, like, you could book them against any ranked UFC fighter in their division, and I think that they could hold their own, especially the bottom of the ranked divisions. But yeah, so, but yeah, I mean, especially like, who's looking at this with a lot, who's rubbing their hands together, thinking of that meme of that guy hiding behind the tree, rubbing his hands together. PFL. There's someone that is definitely hoping for one championship to fold, because if they do, they have a lot of really good fighters. Assuming if they folded, it would be like they fold and then their fighters are released into the air. Or what if like PFL bought? Here's something crazy you could see in 2024. What if PFL buys one championship's MMA division? I don't know if they have. I mean, I know they didn't exchange cash for the Bellator guys, although they are taking on one. people pointed out to me in on my YouTube video, like, hey, PFL didn't spend anything on the Bellator deal, so it was a good deal. Yes, but PFL is taking on is going to be signing the paychecks for like 200 and some more fighters. So it's not like this is costing them nothing. They still have to write, or however many fighters they keep around. It's going to be an expense to keep on these Bellator fighters, relative to how much they can bring in. Not sure, but like, yeah. What if PFL just straight up like bought one's MMA division? That would be really interesting. I could see that working out well for both parties for sure. PFL gets all those fighters I just listed released into there, and then you're starting to be like, okay, PFL bought the number 2 promotion, and then as number 3, they bought maybe the number 4 promotion in terms of like one's MMA side of things. So, and gives PFL the opportunity to break into Asia. That would be really interesting, for sure. I see. If you guys know Lauren Mack, he is a PFL executive, and he is always taking, honestly, pretty hilarious shots at One Championship and like Chatri on LinkedIn. I think that cracks me up about the PFL guys is that they're always posting on LinkedIn, and it's really, they're like the only MMA promotion that's actively really doing that. And Lauren Mack is always posting really funny things, like really funny shots against One Championship. I think it's funny, but that's just why I think it would be interesting. So asking, what's the purpose of hyperbole? Great question. Does it ruin the sport to bill a fighter as unbeatable or unstoppable? Does one running on hyperbole make them a laughing stock? So I think, and I'm peeking ahead to like the next question about casual fans. This kind of actually bleeds into that, because if you're thinking about different levels of MMA fans, casual fans that become informed fans, that become hardcore fans, basically like hardcore fans could probably see through a lot of the BS of the hyperbole, but hyperbole is meant to get your attention. So think about like, they don't like, there's not a whole lot of these videos on YouTube anymore that are like actual clickbait, where like clickbait, the definition is that you're promised something that you're not actually going to get. So in a clickbait YouTube thumbnail, it, you know, or a BuzzFeed headline or wherever would say like, you'll never believe this, like this will blow your mind, this will have you in tears, blah, blah, blah. And then you read the article and it's a blurb about something that's actually not that interesting. There's nothing really, that's clickbait. And One Championship has used that's kind of tying into hyperbole. Someone put out a graphic a little while ago. I actually have this saved on my Twitter. Where they like, what did they do? This is hilarious. It said, I've been working with YouTube's API. So of course, the first thing I did was count the number of emojis they use in the titles of their YouTube videos, of that One Championship uses in their titles of their YouTube videos. So you look at One Championship's YouTube channel, which is almost, it's like this kind of cult thing of like the expression of hyperbole in their YouTube thumbnails and titles, lots of emojis, lots of wacky and over the top thumbnails. And in a different era, that was used to get your attention, trying to grow the audience. So like one is trying to gather like the casual and informed, which informed I'm just kind of saying is like the medium tier. Medium is like an informed fan. I'm answering the next question too. Casual fan is you tune in for the biggest fights. Conor McGregor, John Jones, you're familiar with like most of the UFC champions, the biggest stars, but you don't really understand how the sport works, and you don't tune in for like, 80% of the content. An informed fan probably watches like most UFC cards, but maybe doesn't watch a lot of other MMA. And then, then there's levels of varying degrees, but a hardcore fan, I would say, is someone that watches most UFC events, watches a lot of other MMA events. They're spending a lot of their free time listening to podcasts like this and doing kind of like getting into the weeds of things. They're trying to figure out how the sport works. They are hardcore fans of different fighters, some that aren't even necessarily having a big following. So honestly, like y'all, I would put most of y'all on that level because hello, this is a small podcast. And the fact that you're able to find this podcast probably means that you spend a lot of time thinking about MMA. But otherwise, I think that's what hyperbole is targeted at, is like, can we get people, like the most people's attention? I think at a point it starts to run out. Just like clickbait isn't really a thing like it was in like 2014. It's kind of a old retired social media strategy because people can kind of see through it now. And even some social media platforms have things to like downvote or whatever, different kinds of clickbait. So, Chaudhry is always saying, oh, we're the number one this, we're the blah, 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 blah. And he's the other point of hyperbole that I think when YouTube, social media hyperbole, that's to get the fans. But when you hear Chaudhry using hyperbole, he's not talking to people like you and me. Chaudhry is talking directly to investors because fans don't necessarily care what the Nielsen numbers are. Fans don't care if one championship is the number one, this or that. Chaudhry is trying to get more investors, and investors that may not know a whole lot about the inner workings of MMA, because investors typically are not hardcore MMA fans. If Chaudhry can make a good PowerPoint presentation, selectively choosing different things or even exaggerating things, then he can get more investors. And that's really what makes his brand run, is investors, or at least that's half of it. The other half is actually turning a profit because fans have bought into your product. So I think that's one strategy with hyperbole. I'm starting to get little signals here and there that maybe investors are starting to see through that. And so that's when I'm like, okay, because so far one championship has been able to just get investors, I'm guessing off of hyperbole and probably some really good sales pitches. But after a time, and, like, who said that? Mike Kogan from Bellator said that you can't be a startup for 10 years. Eventually you have to turn a profit. Eventually investors are going to be able to start to, all it takes is an investor just doing a basic Google search, one championship finances, and you'll get lots of articles showing you what the real numbers are on that. So eventually investors are going to start to see through that. Fans are probably going to be polarized between fans that don't believe the bullshit and fans that are just already diehard one championship fans. And there's a lot of those. There really are a lot of those. So I think that's why. So kind of touched on the casual fan. Is it those who do not have a platform to state their opinions, or is it someone with a non-respectable opinion? I think you can be a casual fan and have decent opinions. I think it's just knowing what your lane is, because there are casual fans that step over from boxing, that step over from being a hardcore fan in other sports. And so they kind of have some like general idea how sports on a big level work. So being a casual fan is not a bad thing. I'm a casual fan of a lot of things, and you probably are too. But I'm not going around like I would consider myself a casual fan of the Kansas City Royals baseball team, but I don't have a Royals podcast. I don't tweet about the Royals. I don't really talk about my opinions about the Royals. I'm from Kansas City. I used to go to Royals games a lot, even growing up. My dad's a big baseball fan, and it helped that the Royals went and won the World Series in 2015. So that's why I'm a fan. But I don't really know a whole lot about them. I enjoy the games. but that, I mean, we're all casual fans of things. I think it's you can be a casual fan and then act like you're a hardcore. I think that is the nasty part that we don't like. So pretty familiar with Chinese MMA fandom. Nice. Xiaonan is not in the good graces of our community. So I've heard. Don't you think that would roll over in America? I was in Boston and people loved Wei Li there. Oh yeah, there's another place that you could have that fight is in Boston. Probably not going to go back there this soon though. But I think that they're just probably wouldn't, as far as I know, Yan would be neither popular nor unpopular in the US. I think if you went to China, I don't know if it would just be apathy or negative, like literal boos, if they held the fight in China with Yan versus Zhang. But I think probably American fans would be somewhat apathetic. She doesn't really have a big following, which did y'all see? I don't know. Y'all probably saw this. Her Instagram was in bad shape this week, like really bad shape. She just got it restored. Man, I felt so bad for her. Her Instagram got hacked, all her photos deleted, and it was I was like, man, that's really going to suck if you're going to have to like restart your Instagram. But she did get it back. She just posted a few hours ago that she's back, but still doesn't have any photos on. She didn't get her photos back, but she's at 47K followers, which is like pretty good, all things considered. Like I would say that's more than an average UFC fighter, or slightly more. So I think that I've never gotten any kind of indication that she has anything negative towards her in the US, as far as I know. And saying I didn't expect Boston to love Zhang. Yeah. So Ghost calls himself a casual, and so is Jack Slack. Sometimes they're doing that ironically. I think probably just means that they pay a lot of attention to specific things and don't pay attention to everything else. Because so if you're a casual, I would call myself like, I don't really follow a lot of the drama that goes on. So some of you all can talk about drama that goes on between fighters, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even know about that. Had no idea these fighters were beefing. Sometimes I'm interested in it, like the Ian Gary stuff that came up over the last couple of weeks. I was like, okay, let me just lift up this rock and see what's going on here, and just so I can like have an idea of what's going on. But a lot of times the stuff that goes on with fighters, I don't even pay attention to. So in that way, like you can probably call me a casual, because I'm like, I didn't even know these guys had a problem with each other, or I don't even care. So yeah, there's that, but I pay attention to a very specific level of things. In short, there's no real definition of casual, other than I would just say someone that only tunes in for like one or two UFC events a year, the Connors, the John Jones, Brock Lesnar back in the day, that kind of stuff. I would definitely, obvious that would be a casual fan. So asking about how you avoid getting hacked on Instagram sounds crazy. I know, honestly, now that you mentioned that, I'm like, that is scary. I think, let me see. I'm sorry, I'm not just on my phone. Interesting. So Yan Xiaonan is verified on Meta on Instagram, but she still got hacked. I was going to say maybe if you sign up for Meta Verified, it makes it harder, with the blue check mark, and then you get like better customer service. You're supposed to get like identity protection, or like very like proactive identity protection on Instagram, but it still happens. So I'm like, maybe even that isn't so much of like a benefit. So I don't know. I don't know how you avoid getting hacked on Instagram. It makes me scared because, oh man, what if I were to lose everything I have on there? That would really, really suck. I don't know. I was thinking about trying Meta Verified soon. I think it's finally open to businesses, which I have a business account. So thinking about trying that. Anyways, thanks so much for your questions, guys. Great chat today. Real meaty stuff, especially when we got into one championship. But that's what I love talking about. Not hoping for their downfall, but also I'm neither positive or negative on them. Just think it's really interesting to watch what they're doing. But yeah, really enjoyed chatting with you all today. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Enjoy these fights on Saturday. I will most likely film potentially even a live reaction after UFC Vegas this Saturday. Since there are a lot of Asian fighters on the card, I'm definitely going to be watching that very intently. So excited for that. And until we talk next time, enjoy the fights.